And welcome. We're reading Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. If you would like to get read out loud to, I speak English good, and I'm going to be reading to y'all today. We're on volume 3, the last volume of the second chapter of Frankenstein. Victor Frankenstein is off to London, and I truly don't remember why. It sounds like he wants to talk to some philosophers to whose knowledge and discoveries were of indispensable use to me in my present undertaking. Like, is he wanting to talk to philosophers? There's just people who know about it and about bringing people back to life from the dead in England, or whose knowledge and discoveries were indispensable use to me in my present undertaking. The latter method of obtaining the desired intelligence was dilatory and unsatisfactory. So his last method was unsatisfactory. He wants to make like an even better zombie creature. He wants to create an even better creature who's also gonna think his creature's hideous. But his creature's not hideous. Literally, the outside of him is hideous. The inside of him is incredible. And you're just pissed because he killed William. But only because he's mad at you. He was mad at you, Victor. This is all really wild. Oh, when I'll show this puzzle again. It's just the picture of the puzzle, but it's really fun. And I do remember, I do have to look up. Look at all that. Look at all that. I do remember that I have to look up, from learning about this, the Jewish legend of Golem, or Gollum. Sounds like Lord of the Rings. And I had no idea that was even a thing. We'll read more of this in a few videos, I suppose. For now, chapter 2 of volume 3 of Frankenstein. They're off to London. London was our present point of rest. We determined to remain several months in this wonderful and celebrated city. Clerval desired the intercourse of the men of genius and talent who flourished at this time, but this was with me a secondary object. I was principally occupied with the means of obtaining the information necessary for the completion of my promise, and quickly availed myself of the letters of introduction that I had brought with me, addressed to the most distinguished natural philosophers. Oh yeah, I forgot to also say that Victor's dad really wants him to get married to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is sad that he's leaving. And Victor's also like, the monster said he would follow me anywhere, so hopefully he's following me, and that will help protect Elizabeth and my family. But also, it does sound like Clerval dies. So the monster is probably going to see that he's not working on what he promised to work on. Maybe there's a conversation. Anyway, this is going to be crazy. This tiny book and all this. Writers are so incredible. If this journey had taken place during my days of study and happiness, it would have afforded me inexpressible pleasure. But a blight had come over my existence, and I only visited these people for the sake of the information they might give me on the subject in which my interest was so terribly profound. Company was irksome to me. When alone, I could fill my mind with the sights of heaven and earth. The voice of Henry soothed me, and I could thus cheat myself into a transitory peace. But busy, uninteresting, joyous faces brought back despair to my heart. I saw an insurmountable barrier placed between me and my fellow men. This barrier was sealed with the blood of William and Justine, and to reflect on the events connected with those names filled my soul with anguish. But in Clerval I saw the image of my former self. He was inquisitive and anxious to gain experience and instruction. The difference of manners which he observed was to him an inexhaustible source of instruction and amusement. He was also pursuing an object he had long had in view. His design was to visit India. Well, yeah, he was into like Asian stuff. He was learning Arabic? Wow, it feels like so long ago. This book is so tiny. Clerval was learning Arabic. Or was that from Jane Eyre? That might have been from Jane Eyre. Okay. Whoa. European his times in India. In the belief that he had in his knowledge of its various languages, and in the views he had taken of its society, the means of materially assisting the progress of European colonization and trade. Oh, God. Talk about despair. In Britain only could he further the execution of his plan. He was forever busy, and the only check to his enjoyments was my sorrowful and dejected mind. I tried to conceal this as much as possible, that I might not debar him from the pleasures natural to one who was entering on a new scene of life, undisturbed by any care or bitter recollection. I often refused to accompany him, alleging another engagement, that I might remain alone. He is estranging himself, and his creation has been ostracized. They're living parallel lives. I now also began to collect the materials necessary for my new creation, and this was to me like the torture of single drops of water continually falling on my head. Japanese water torture, I think. I don't know. Every thought that was devoted to it was an extreme anguish, and every word that I spoke in allusion to it caused my lips to quiver and my heart to palpitate. After passing some months in London, we received a letter from a person in Scotland, where Mary Shelley spent a lot of her time, cute, who had formerly been our visitor at Geneva. He mentioned the beauties of his native country and asked us if those were not sufficient allurements to induce us to prolong our journey as far north as Perth, where he resided. Clerval eagerly desired to accept this invitation, and I, although I abhorred society, wished to view again mountains and streams, Gandalf. I want to see the mountains again. And somewhere to finish my book. And all the wondrous works with which nature adorns her chosen dwelling places. Oh, nature's decorating the world. That's so cute to think about. We had arrived in England at the beginning of October, and it was now February. We accordingly determined to commence our journey towards the north at the expiration of another month. In this expedition we did not intend to follow the great road to Edinburgh, but to visit Windsor, Oxford, Matchlock, and the Cumberland Lakes, resolving to arrive at the completion of this tour about the end of July. Let's make a road trip out of it. I packed up my chemical instruments and the materials I had collected, resolving to finish my labours in the obscure nook in the northern highlands of Scotland. We quitted London on the 27th of March and remained a few days at Windsor, rambling in its beautiful forest. This was a new scene to us mountaineers, the majestic oak, the quantity of game, and the herds of stately deer were all novelties to us. From thence we proceeded to Oxford. As we entered this city, our minds were filled with the remembrance of the events that had been transacted there more than a century and a half before. It was here that Charles and I had collected his forces. Oh, Charles. It was here that Charles I had collected his forces. This city had remained faithful to him after the whole nation had forsaken his cause to join the standard of Parliament and liberty. The memory of that unfortunate king and his companions, the amiable Falkland, the insolent Goring, his queen and son, gave a peculiar interest to every part of the city which they might be supposed to have inhabited. The spirit of elder days found a dwelling here, and we delighted to trace its footsteps. If these feelings had not found an imaginary gratification, the appearance of the city had yet in itself sufficient beauty to obtain our admiration. The colleges are ancient and picturesque. I think that about like Yale. And this is from 200 years ago, and there are colleges there that are ancient and picturesque. Not collages, because that's okay. The streets are almost magnificent, and the lovely Isis, which flows beside it through meadows of exquisite verdure, is spread forth into a placid expanse of waters, which reflects its majestic assemblage of towers and spires and domes embossed among aged trees. I enjoyed this scene, and yet my enjoyment was embittered by both by the memory of the past and the anticipation of the future. If you got one foot in the past and one foot in the future, you're pissing on the present. I was formed for peaceful happiness. During my youthful days, discontent never visited my mind. And if I was ever overcome by ennui, the sight of what is beautiful in nature, or the study of what is excellent and sublime in the productions of man, could always interest my heart and communicate elasticity to my spirits. But I am a blasted tree. The bolt has entered my soul, and I felt then that I should survive to exhibit what I shall soon cease to be, a miserable spectacle of wrecked humanity, pitiable to others and intolerable to myself. He's so dramatic. We passed a considerable period at Oxford, rambling among its environs and endeavouring to identify every spot on which might relate to the most animating epoch of English history. Our little voyages of discovery were often prolonged by the successive objects that presented themselves. We visited the tomb of the illustrious Hampden, and the field on which that patriot fell. I know nothing about these stories. God, there's so much to learn. I have to learn who Charles I is. I forget. For a moment my soul was elevated from its debasing and miserable fears to contemplate the divine ideas of liberty and self-sacrifice, of which these sights were the monuments and the remembrances. For an instant I dared to shake off my chains and look around me with a free and lofty spirit, but the iron had heated into my flesh, and I sank again, trembling and hopeless, into my miserable self. I feel like every paragraph in this chapter is like, and then we went here and it was super nice, and then I was destroyed again. This is fun. We left Oxford with regret and proceeded to Matlock, which was our next place of rest. The country in the neighbourhood of this village resembled to a great degree the scenery of Switzerland, but everything is on a lower scale, and the green hills want the crown of a distant white Alps, which always attend on the piney mountains of my native country. We visited the wondrous cave and the little cabinets of natural history, where the curiosities are disposed in the same manner as in the collections at Savoie and Chamonix. The latter name made me tremble when pronounced by Henry, and I hastened to quit Matlock, with which that terrible scene was thus associated. Next paragraph. From Derby, still journeying northwards, we passed 2 months into Cumberland and Westmoreland. I could now almost fancy myself among the Swiss mountains. The little patches of snow which yet lingered on the northern sides of the mountains, the lakes, and the dashing of the rocky streams were all familiar and dear sights to me. Here also we made some acquaintances who almost contrived to cheat me into happiness. The delight of Clerval was proportionably greater than mine. His mind expanded in the company of men of talent, and he found in his own nature greater capacities and resources than he could have imagined himself to have possessed while he was associated with his inferiors. "I could pass my life here," said he to me, "and among these mountains I could scarcely regret Switzerland and the Rhine." But he found that a traveller's life is one that includes much pain amidst its enjoyments. His feelings are forever on the stretch, and when he begins to sink into repose, he finds himself obliged to quit that on which he rests in pleasure for something new, which again engages his attention, and which also he forsakes for other novelties. So he's chasing new stuff. Is that what we're saying? We had scarcely visited the various lakes of Cumberland and Westmoreland, and conceived an affection for some of the inhabitants, when the period of our appointment with our Scotch friend approached, and we left them to travel on. For my own part, I was not sorry. I had now neglected my promise for some time, and I feared the effects of the demon's disappointment. He might remain in Switzerland and wreak his vengeance on my relatives. This idea pursued me, and tormented me at every moment from which I might otherwise have snatched repose and peace. I waited for my letters with feverish impatience. If they were delayed, I was miserable and overcome by 1,000 fears. And when they arrived, I saw the superscription of Elizabeth or my father. I hardly dared to read and ascertain my fate. Sometimes I thought that the fiend followed me, and might expedite my remissness by murdering my companion. When these thoughts possessed me, I would not quit Henry for a moment, but followed him as his shadow to protect him from the fancied rage of his destroyer. I felt as if I had committed some great crime, the consciousness of which haunted me. I was guiltless, but I had indeed drawn a horrible curse upon my head, as mortal as that of crime. "You have committed a crime, sir." I visited Edinburgh with languid eyes and mind, and yet that city might have interested the most unfortunate being. Clerval did not like it so well as Oxford, for the antiquity of the latter city was more pleasing to him. But the beauty and regularity of the new town of Edinburgh, its romantic castle and its environs, the most delightful in the world. Arthur's Seat, St. Bernard's Well, and the Pentland Hills compensated him for the change, and filled him with cheerfulness and admiration. But I was impatient to arrive at the termination of my journey. We left Edinburgh in a week, passing through Cowper, St. Andrews, and along the banks of the Tay, to Perth, where our friend expected us. But I was in no mood to laugh and talk with strangers, or enter into their feelings or plans with good humour, except from a guest. And accordingly I told Clerval that I wished to make the tour of Scotland alone. "Do you?" said I. I told Clerval that I wished to make the tour of Scotland alone. "Do you," said I, "enjoy yourself, and let this be our rendezvous. I may be absent a month or two, but do not interfere with my motions, I entreat you. Leave me to peace and solitude for a short time, and when I return, I hope it will be with a lighter heart, more congenial to your own temper." Henry wished to dissuade me, but seeing me bent on this plan, ceased to remonstrate. He entreated me to write often. "I'd rather be with you," he said, "in your solitary rambles, than with this Scotch people, whom I do not know. Hasten, then, my dear friend, to return, that I may again feel myself somewhat at home, which I cannot do in your absence." Having parted from my friend, I determined to visit some remote spot of Scotland and finish my work in solitude. I did not doubt that the monster followed me, and would discover himself to me when I should have finished, that he might receive his companion. With this resolution I traversed the northern highlands, and fixed on one of the remotest of the Orkneys as the scene of my labours. It was a place fitted for such a work, being hardly more than a rock, whose high sides were continually beaten upon by the waves. The soil was barren, scarcely affording pasture for a few miserable cows, the oatmeal for its inhabitants, which consisted of 5 persons whose gaunty and scraggy limbs gave tokens of their miserable fare. Vegetables and bread, when they indulged in such luxuries, and even fresh water was to be procured from the mainland, which was about 5 miles distant. On the whole island there were but 3 miserable huts, and one of these was vacant when I arrived. This I hired. It contained but 2 rooms, and these exhibited all the squadliness of the most miserable penury. The thatch had fallen in, the walls were unplastered, and the door was off its hinges. I ordered it to be repaired, bought some furniture, and took possession. An incident which would doubtless have occasioned some surprise had not all the senses of the cottage been benumbed by want and squalid poverty. As it was, I lived ungazed at and unmolested, hardly thanked for the pittance of food and clothes which I gave. So much does suffering blunt even the coarsest sensations of men. Speak for yourself. In this retreat, I devoted the morning to labor, but in the evening, when the weather permitted, I walked on the stony beach of the sea to listen to the waves as they roared and dashed at my feet. It was a monstrous, yet ever-changing scene. I thought of Switzerland. It was far different from this desolate and appalling landscape. Its hills are covered with vines, and its cottages are scattered thickly in the plains. Its fair lakes reflect a blue and gentle sky, and when troubled by the winds, their tumult is but as the play of a lively infant when compared to the roarings of the giant ocean. In this manner I disturbed my occupants when I first arrived, but as I proceeded on in my labor, it became every day more horrible and irksome to me. Sometimes I could not prevail on myself to enter my laboratory for several days, and at other times I toiled day and night in order to complete my work. It was indeed a filthy process in which I was engaged. During my first experiment, a kind of enthusiastic frenzy had blinded me to the horror of my employment. My mind was intently fixed on the consummation of my labor, and my eyes were shut to the horror of my proceedings. But now I went to it in cold blood, and my heart often sickened at the work of my hands. Thus situated, employed in the most detestable occupation, immersed in solitude where nothing could for an instant call my attention from the actual scene in which I was engaged, my spirits became unequal. I grew restless and nervous. Every moment I feared to meet my prosecutor. Sometimes I sat with my eyes fixed on the ground, fearing to raise them lest they should encounter the object which I so much dreaded to behold. I feared to wander from the sight of my fellow creatures, lest when alone he should come to claim his companion. In the meantime I worked on, and my labor was already considerably advanced. I looked towards its completion with a tremulous and eager hope, which I dared not trust myself to question, but which was intermixed with obscure forebodings of evil that made my heart sicken in its bosom. Oh, Victor. I do want to look up, like, Switzerland. I do just want to look up Switzerland. Monaco. Okay, it is very much landlocked. Okay, Italy, Geneva is in Switzerland, but it looks very much like it's in France. Very, very, very close to France. How did Switzerland remain neutral during World War II? Is that true? Did I just make that up? Germany is right there, and Austria is right there, and Italy's right there, and France is right there. I mean, I knew that, but I have to, like, look at a map of Europe every single day to, like, remember where everything is. It's so embarrassing. But I know where U.S. states are, so I do know that. because that is where I'm from, and I'm not from Europe, but I could get good at it if I prioritize that. I'm turning into Victor. Join me next time for chapter 3 of volume 3, fun when that happens, of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I'm keeping the puzzle up until I finish the book, which will be very shortly. And Halloween came and went. I hope you guys all had a fun Halloween. So fun. All Hallows Eve. And the next book I'm going to read is Little Women, because that does feel like a wintertime book, even though I know it's very much still fall. It's a fall to winter book, I'll say that. But it just makes me feel like, you know, there's a war and dad's gone and there's all these kids and it's wintertime, and you know, it just feels like a winter book to me. But maybe it won't by the time I'm done. We'll have to see, because I've never read before. So okay, volume 3, chapter 3 next time. Happy reading to you all, and ta-ta!